Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Stahls TV presentation on heat printing performance wear. We certainly appreciate the time you have taken out of your day to come out with us and watch this presentation and learn ultimately how to make more money with decorating these challenging fabrics. We have a robust agenda to fit together in 60 minutes today. So if you'll stick with us throughout, you'll learn about a couple different print technologies that you can use on performance wear. You'll learn about some products that Stahls manufactures specifically for performance fabrics, and you'll learn some helpful tips and techniques with utilizing different cover sheets, different types of loading and application on the heat press to make you more successful. We have some helpers with me today on this Stahls TV presentation. We have Joe Kaczynski, who will be handling one of our camera angles to help you get up-close shots of the different performance fabrics we'll decorate. And we also have Courtney Matlick, who will be handling the chat for us today. So if you have any questions at all throughout the course of the presentation, chat those in through the GoToWebinar panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Those questions come directly to Courtney. She'll answer them as she can, and then we'll stop several times throughout the presentation where she can direct them to me. To start things, I'd like to launch a couple polls so I can understand our listening audience today. And the first poll we have basically asks you about different pieces of equipment that you have in your shop so we can see what you have the ability to produce from a transfer standpoint. So we'll go ahead and launch that poll. You can just take a few moments to answer that for me. And then we'll conclude that in a couple seconds here, and Courtney will share the results with everybody and with me as well. Okay, so we'll go ahead and close it and share the results.
100% heat press, 89% have a vinyl cutter, and 28% have a solvent.
Okay, great. So a lot of heat press and vinyl cutter owners, which will be helpful today. And then just so we can understand the varying levels or volumes of customers we have today, we're going to launch the second poll asking you how many heat presses that you do own. And we'll only have one other poll after this, which we'll save to the very towards the end of the presentation after we show some of the products. All right, we'll close that off.
44% have 1, 46% have 2 to 3, and 4% have 4 to 5, 6 plus.
Okay, excellent. So we got all sorts of volume types of customers listening today, from one heat press to multiples, even some of you with 6+ machines. So I think as you start to look at the transfer technologies that we'll be presenting, you'll see that a lot of these technologies scale regardless of your volume, whether you just want to do some small quantity stuff on one heat press or whether you want to put some of these products into high production. They're very advanced adhesives and products, and there's definitely price breaks as you start to build up into mass production and quantity. So the first thing I'm going to start out with is just a basic white performance shirt, and we'll be working today between the Hotronix Fusion and the Hotronix Air Fusion heat press. One of the first most critical things when you're heat printing any type of performance fabric and any heat printing item in general is to make sure you get your item completely flat. In order to do that, you can work with different interchangeable platens. You ultimately want to invest in a machine that will allow you to split the garment and thread it onto a platen. But you want to get your item extremely flat and get all collars, all edges off the press. What happens sometimes is when you think your item's flat, but you still have a collar or a seam or an edge up on the press and you press it, this area will receive more pressure than the actual print area. And while your transfer may still apply fine on a cotton t-shirt, on a performance fabric, you may get a glossing up of the seam or what's called a heat press mark, which is one of the biggest challenges with printing performance fabric. So you'll just want to make sure you have your collar draped off of the edge, get a completely flat print surface. In the preheating step of printing performance wear, you always want to use your cover sheet as well. So there are a few different styles of cover sheets available. Here we have a non-stick cover sheet made of Teflon material that we'll use in the preheating process. You can also utilize a cover sheet such as craft paper, and then I'll show you a little bit later a flexible application pad cover sheet that's good if you have an extremely heat-sensitive fabric. I'm going to print a transfer on this in a moment and explain that to you, but before I go there, I want to show you one more thing about getting your print area flat. Here's an example, if you can capture this, Joe, where we actually have a heat press mark on the garment where it's actually some print through of a raised area beneath. So in addition to just getting the collars and the edges off of the press, you also want to make sure that you don't just lay it flat and have any print through of seams, V-necks. In this case, this racerback jersey created a raised pressure area on my print surface and ultimately caused print through. So if you invest in the right type of heat press, you can get a machine where you can quickly interchange these platens, which we'll do on our next application, or you can work with different heat printing pillows or print perfect pads to ultimately get a flat print area. So we'll talk a little more about time, temperature, and pressure in a moment. For this sample, I'm using a digital transfer product called SuperTech Clear. This particular transfer is a full color design. It was printed on a clear-based media. It's a matte material, and it was reverse printed on a VersaCam or a large format printer cutter machine, a solvent or eco-solvent printer for those 28% of you that own those devices. So you can either print this yourself if you own the device. If you don't own a print device, you can order digital transfers or multicolor transfers from Stahls, and they're called CAD prints on the website. And there is a clear version of the CAD prints as well. So I'll position my design. I'm going to put my cover sheet back over top. And I'm going to heat press it for the recommended time, temperature, and pressure. Now this is a 100% polyester shirt. It's a light color. We're going to deal with some dark colors a little bit later. But typically when you're dealing with polyester and it's 100% poly and it's a light color, sublimation is also a very viable technology for printing performance wear. The challenge sometimes with sublimation is that it applies at such a high heat. It applies up at around 375 to 400 degrees. Sometimes it actually creates a yellowing of the performance fabric when you're printing it. In this case, with this digital transfer product that's designed specifically for low temp application, we're only pressing this at 280 degrees for 10 seconds. So not only are we reducing the temperature by 100 degrees, we're reducing the time versus sublimation upwards of 30 to 45 seconds. So you can imagine when there's heat-sensitive fabrics that want to scorch, that lower temp application really helps so you don't get yellowing on light-colored garments or you don't get the heat press mark on dark-colored fabrics. This particular product is a cold peel. Every heat transfer comes with a recommended time, temperature, and pressure. So I'm going to remove this from the press. I'm going to let it cool down and we'll come back and peel it here in a moment. Before we move on from the heat press to peel that, let me show you a little bit about getting your item completely flat. On most presses that are manufactured by Stahls, there's interchangeable attachments. If I want to print something that's a little slimmer cut, like a youth compression garment, I want to swap out this large 16 by 20 attachment and perhaps load a smaller one like this 11 by 15 attachment. It just clicks into place. So if you're shopping for a new heat press anytime in the near future and want to print performance wear or a wide variety of items, find one with easy changeable platens. The next garment that I'm going to print, this could be polyester or it could be nylon. It's a compression-based fabric. So the last one we did was a loose fit. This is a compression like the base layer fabrics you see out on the market. This particular garment is from Teamwork Athletic. To just lay this on the press, I'm sorry, I'm throwing you out there. Lay this on the press, you're going to have these seams up here. But when I'm able to open it and split it onto the press, then I'm able to drag it and get most of the seams completely off of the print area. Anytime you're dealing with polyester, you always want to do that preheat step. And anytime you're changing platens, you want to dial in the pressure accordingly for that particular attachment. So I have another version of the digital transfer here. It looks clear as well, but this is a clear gloss versus a clear matte, just to show you some different finishes for light colored fabrics. I'm going to press this design on so we can compare those. You can get creative and print different patterns here. I have a camo pattern as well, just so you can get the look of it. We'll press that beneath here. Cover everything and give it the full 10 seconds. Now this Stahls Tech line of material is nice. It applies at 280 degrees, which is typically good for most of your heat sensitive fabrics. You still may run into fabrics occasionally that we'll talk a little bit about later that still want to scorch under 280 degrees of heat. And so we'll show you some ways you can break up the application into shorter dwell times to kind of address that. But this is applied, once again, I need to wait till it's cooled down to peel it. So I'm just going to remove my shirt from the press, lay it out on the table, and then I should be ready to bring my other shirt back that we pressed earlier and remove the carrier. So I'm just going to release that, and then you get a nice matte finish on that, and you get something that's soft, and you get something that's stretchable as well when you're dealing with this clear media. The other challenge with performance fabrics, particularly when you're sublimating, is when you deal with a sublimation, you get a piece of paper that you actually print with the sublimation ink on, and sometimes when you press that onto the actual garment, it leaves an indent mark around your image. That's really because you're leaving that paper on there in order for the ink to release for such a high temperature for so long of a time. With this, it's nice, even though there is like a clear plastic carrier around the edge, you don't see any mark on the garment from that carrier because it's only under the press for so little time. So in order to address some of those issues, you definitely want to look for a product that applies at a low temperature and a low time setting as possible. And here's the gloss version. This gives you the same sort of finish, but almost like a wet look, which is really trending in athletics right now. You get a nice wet gloss effect on your performance fabric. So far, in order to eliminate scorching or yellowing of light garments, we know we want to get our item flat, and we also know we want to pick a transfer product that applies at a low temperature for as short of time as possible. And this product has nice stretch and recovery as well. Before I go to some different transfer types and some darker colored fabrics, I want to show you one more thing, just a cool application with that clear product. Because when you find a product, there's not a ton of them out there. Stahls, we manufacture probably 10 to 15 different products that work very well with performance fabrics and apply at low temperatures. So when you find a product that works beautifully on performance fabrics, you kind of want to maximize the number of applications you can do with that product when it's on your shelf. And so I'm just going to show you a cool thing that you can do with this clear product if you just have a vinyl cutter and you don't have a printer cutter in-house. I'll load a dark color charcoal performance shirt onto the press. Once again, I'm going to preheat. Dialing in my pressure, it just needs a very light pressure to heat apply. And we'll press the clear matte. You can see this is the same clear product, it's just cut instead of printed and cut. So if you just have a vinyl cutter, you can order this just for cutting. And for those of you that have ever seen a laser etched garment, It's a pretty expensive piece of equipment to laser etch a garment, but it leaves a really cool result. This will give you a comparable by just cutting clear media. It gives you like a laser etched look on the front of this dark colored shirt. So you can apply the clear mat onto any colored shirt. It tends to show up more when you're going for this effect on the mid to darker tones. And I'll let that cool down and then I'll remove it. And in the meantime, I'm going to go over to the back. Make sure I got a clean surface on my shirt here. And of course, I need to preheat the back. And I'll do the gloss product on back. So the gloss won't look like a laser etched product, but you'll still have that nice glossy look. It's a really neat effect on these darker colored fabrics, just using it as a single color vinyl cut product. And we'll let both those samples cool down, and then we'll come over and peel them at the table. Now, as those are cooling down, one of the next things I want to show you with heat printing is that is a digital print cut product that you can order transfers in. Another product available for decorating performance shirts are screen printed transfers. So for those of you that are out there ordering screen printed transfers from the Stahls company, Stahls Transfer Express, you need to take note that although the goof-proof transfer says it will work on polyester, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the product that you want to pick for a polyester performance wear. So this is a goof-proof transfer that we applied earlier on this performance fabric, and we pressed it at the recommended 365 degrees for 4 seconds. And you can see that the fabric has a nice glossy heat press mark, and you're even getting a mark on the edges. You can see the heat press box on this, especially when you're in person, but hopefully you're picking that up on video. I believe you are here. So Transfer Express has dialed in a special adhesive that applies at a low temperature. It has a little bit different of a surface and a feel to it, but you're ultimately going to protect this fabric and your customer from walking around with a heat press mark on the shirt. So I have the Air Fusion heat press dialed in for this application that's called Elastaprints. So Elastaprints applies at 275 degrees for 10 seconds, and it is a cold peel as well. So I'll start with the preheat on the garment, still following the rules, making sure everything's completely flat. I'm going to preheat it just for about 5 seconds. Oh, and it accidentally took my cover sheet with it. It's all right. And then I'm going to lay down the Elastaprints on the shirt. Now this is a screen printed transfer. For those of you not familiar with screen printed transfer, it's basically plastisol ink on paper that you just apply with a heat press. It basically makes you a screen printer without all the mess and cleanup. You can just order these pre-printed, and all you need to do is heat apply. So I'll give it 275 degrees, 10 seconds. And this is a cold peel as well, so I'm just going to remove this from the heat press. We'll let it cool down and then peel it. So a lot of these performance fabric adhesives are designed to be cold peels. This clear one that we did a moment earlier is cooled down, so I'll peel that for you to show you that laser etched-like effect. I just think that's an awesome look on that shirt. to the back and we'll show you the gloss effect as well. This is called Super Tech Clear. So you get a nice wet look to that. No heat press mark. It's a really cool effect. And I'll throw the Elastaprints transfer right in the shot here. And just remove that after it's cooled down. And then you get a nice print with no heat press mark. If we compare the two sides on the performance wear, 275 degrees for 10 seconds. On this side versus the Goof Proof, which was 365 for 4 seconds, the heat is causing a heat press mark on this side, whereas the Elastoprint performs very well, and as its name implies, has good stretch and recovery as well, so you can use it on the compression fabrics in addition to the loose fit style polyesters. Courtney, any questions coming in at the moment that you need to share with me?
This question is what temperature to use on a clear gloss and matte PDF says 305.
Okay, so all the Stahls Tech products recommendation is 300 degrees from the go back to camera 1 here. All of these Stahls Tech products recommendation is 300 degrees, but they have a plus minus 20 degree variance. So you can actually drop those to 280 degrees and they still meet the Stahls lab certifications for wash and wear, meaning they're going to outlast the garment or at least 50 wash and dry cycles. And that's good for all of these Stahls Tech products across the board, and it actually works with Solutions Opaque as well. There's something else that will give you some best chances of success when you're printing performance wear and getting adhesion. The Stahls Tech products you can do a straight 10 seconds with, but if you have something that's really heat sensitive, you're going to want to break the dwell time up to 5 seconds and 5 seconds, and that's fine for that product. But what I would recommend doing is you really want to, if you're just doing one shirt and you just started your heat press up and the platen's cold, you want to take some time and preheat the bottom platen. So maybe do a 30 to a 60 second application on your bottom platen before you get started, and that will allow the adhesive to melt quicker on your application without your garment actually having to get, that increased time. So if you keep that bottom platen warm, which will naturally happen if you're running a job of 30 shirts or something, by the time you get to the 5th shirt, it'll already be warm. But when you're starting up printing one item, or you're just doing a few items, always preheat that bottom platen to get started. And that's just a tip that will help your adhesives and limit the heat on your actual performance fabric. Now, when we talk about platens, the other thing that sometimes folks don't think about is when you're applying let's say a medium pressure or 35 psi to a 16 by 20 inch lower platen, that pressure is distributed across a large platen area. So if you're doing a full front t-shirt, sometimes it's easier to not get a heat press mark than if you're maybe doing a left chest shirt. Because by nature, when you start to print things like left chest and you start to get into some zippers and seams and different components of the shirt, we teach you, and it's the right thing to do, you need to build that print area up so you can get accurate time, temperature, and pressure on the actual print area. The challenge is when you build that print area up on a t-shirt and press it, or like a cotton PK polo and press it, it's no big deal. It doesn't leave a heat press mark. If it does, it's temporary and it goes away after a couple hours. But when you start dealing with these synthetic fabrics and polyesters that are heat sensitive, you build that area up and then you apply the same pressure. That pressure is all contained within that small raised area, so it's receiving a much higher pressure than what would be dispersed across the 16 by 20 heater. So what I'm telling you is when you go to print left chest locations, sleeve locations, anything where there's a small area built up to receive the pressure, you need to reduce the pressure on your actual heat press to try to avoid leaving that heat press mark. So we're going to press a left chest logo on this garment, and these garments A lot of these garments are donated by Sanmar. They have a really nice line of garments called Sport Tech. This particular garment I really like. It's a ladies cut. It's just a zip-up sort of performance fabric with some good stretch that's fleece lined as well. So check out their Sport Tech catalog. They have some really nice items and some items that they call posi charged, which I'll talk about in a moment, that help with another challenge with printing performance wear. So obviously I can't just load this here. The zipper is going to be in my way. So I'll need to do a little work here and change out the platen. And I'm going to load my small platen, which is a 6x10 in this case. And this will lead me to another lesson. When you're printing performance wear, another tip is not only does your cover sheet matter, so does the cover for your bottom platen. That matters a lot. The way the performance fibers react and want to expand and contract under heat, they do a lot better when you have this quick slip pad protector or this non-stick Teflon-like material over the bottom platen that allows the garment to expand and contract underneath the heat, not creating a hard edge or a heat press mark. When you throw a platen up there with this medium density silicone pad, the garment doesn't react. There's a little bit more of a hard edge and you have more issues with leaving a heat press mark because of the bottom. So we don't make a quick slip protector for this size. Maybe we will soon, but at the very worst, you can just throw your non-stick cover sheet across the bottom of the press, perhaps attach it with a rubber band. In this case, I'm just going to lay it here while I load my garment. So I'll just try to get to my left chest placement. Truth be told, I would really like a smaller platen so that seam isn't up here because that's at risk to leave a heat press mark, but unfortunately this is the smallest stock attachment that we have. You can always order a custom platen, or I can make a small adjustment here. Here's what's called a print perfect pad. I'm going to slide it up underneath my Teflon sheet. And then I have a praised print area. You just want to make sure your graphic does not exceed the width of your print perfect pad. So you can see all of that pressure is going to be absorbed here. So during my preheat step, I want to make sure I dial back that pressure, be a little extra cautious with it. So I'm not going to damage the garment when I'm dialing in my pressure. Dial it into a very light pressure because it's all going to be delivered on that area of the garment. And that is just a little bigger than my pad, so I'm running into an issue here because I didn't expect to have to put that there. It'll certainly fit my platen underneath. So really, this is a good training tip. You want to evaluate the conditions and the seam structure of your garment before you accept the job or before you print your graphics. In this case, this graphic is not going to receive pressure on the outside edges, so I would want to size that down, reprint it before I actually do my job. Since I don't have that luxury of reprinting on a 60-minute webinar, it's not going to look great, but we're going to turn this thing sideways and print it for you just to show you how it adheres and show you the finish on the material. This is a Stahls Tech product as well. This is our Foil Tech product in one of the shift colors. Like I said, you can break the Stahls Tech product up into 2 steps of 5 seconds. So I'm going to do that. I'll give it a step 1 of 5 seconds to limit the time under heat, especially because I know I'm dealing with a raised area. It's a warm peel, so you just give it a couple seconds. Peel the backing. And I'm going to cover it and give it 5 more seconds. And you can see kind of a foil-like effect to this material. Has a nice sheen to it. And you can expect that when you heat press something, you're going to have a little bit of a box from where it's kind of like ironed down, but I'm not having a heat press box on this garment because I was able to reduce it for the 5 and 5 seconds. And also I made sure to adjust my pressure to a very light pressure to accommodate for the smaller raised print area. So if you're noticing a lot of heat press marks on your left chest prints, it could be a pressure issue in addition to running with a transfer product that's too much time or too much temperature. There are some garments that you just cannot avoid getting the heat press mark on, and that's why when you're printing performance wear, it's always just a good rule of thumb to test one garment before you accept or run a whole job, or before you decide that it's going to be a product that you're going to add to your printable inventory. So if you know you're going to be printing, for instance, if you know you're going to be printing garments from the Sanmar catalog, like the Sport Tech line, and that's going to be the line of performance fabrics that you offer, I would recommend you spend a little bit of time in development up front, actually ordering in maybe the garments you want to offer. You can even, we took and sliced up one garment here into different strips so we can run some different tests to see how sensitive this polyester performance fabric is to heat. You know, just pressing half of a panel here, recording my temperature, time, and pressure settings, as well as my cover sheet. K stands for craft paper. So it's a good way. You can sacrifice one garment that way, get a lot of testing out of it, see where it leaves a heat press mark, and ultimately know that this hoodie, this performance hoodie, is approved for application because I can print it with these 3 products and not leave a heat press mark. I do want to show you one more product before we go to the next lesson on dye migration. I just want to show you that there is a single color standard heat transfer film for performance fabrics. I'm going to load this neon tee, 100% polyester. Preheat, and I'll have to really dial in my pressure since I had it raised up. The product that I recommend from just our standard CAD Cut heat transfer material line is called CAD Cut Premium Plus. We've cut it and weeded it here in the color white. Make sure there's not any little pieces still left behind here. Position it into place. Cover it with a cover sheet and print. I'll use this opportunity to show you about the different cover sheets. To date, we've been printing with the non-stick cover sheet or the craft paper. Stahls also offers a cover sheet called the Flexible Application Pad, which is more of a rubberized silicone-based material. This product works great as long as you understand what it delivers to you. It helps to reduce or eliminate the heat press mark, but the challenge is when you throw it onto your garment, you're actually throwing it onto the garment cold. So you need to, one, either preheat your flexible application pad or increase your dwell time on your heat press to get through this and distribute heat over to the garment. So we'll use it. Premium Plus normally requires an 8-second dwell. Since we're using the flexible application pad, we're going to give it an extra 7 to 10 seconds to get through the pad, deliver some heat to the actual garment. And as I mentioned before, if we would have preheated our platen, that would help as well with getting the adhesive started. Premium Plus 300 degrees, 8 seconds. Also has the plus minus 20 degree variance, so I can drop it to 280 as I'm doing in the example here. And when you're dialing in your pressure, make sure you dial it in with the cover sheet in place and the shirt loaded. We have some really cool innovations coming with the flexible application pad as the starting point of the innovation for eliminating heat press marks on extremely heat sensitive garments, but I'm not at liberty to share at the moment, but stay tuned and stay subscribed to our emails and you'll find out some advancements there soon. I need to wait for this to cool down a little bit to peel it. And this one, I didn't get enough temperature through it, so it's not wanting to lift. So there's nothing to worry about there. I'm just going to cover it and hit it again. Once again, because I didn't preheat my platen, it didn't have enough time to travel through. So I'm going to just increase it and give it another application. Heating and reheating the performance fabric doesn't really impact it. It's just if you're to heat it and reheat it at an extremely high temperature or extremely high time, that's when you start to run into some issues. Any questions coming in while we're finishing this one up? We'll give this a few seconds to cool down. I'm going to take it over to the table and we'll peel it here momentarily. While that's cooling down, I'm going to come over. I want to show you the full range of basic finishes in the Stahls Tech line of product, some of which we've already covered, but some of these products react pretty differently on different colors of garments. So here's the clear gloss and the clear matte that we've already covered. This is the silver shift product and the gold shift. These products basically shift color based on what they're applied to. So if you apply it to a light color fabric like we have here, you get a little more of the iridescent sort of finish in unprinted areas. Whereas if you apply those same products to a dark colored fabric, that's the same exact silver shift material on black versus white. It increases its intensity when it's applied to dark colored fabrics. Looks really nice on ash gray and sort of the medium charcoal shades that are really popular right now. And here's an example of the gold and how it changes. Now I think that's a cool effect, but you may say I just want a standard metallic silver or metallic gold. I don't want the color change. And no worries there either, because there is a whole line within the Stahls Tech where we've applied that special STIX2 adhesive for performance fabrics to a basic metallic silver, metallic gold. And we've even given you a metallic white material that you can work with. And then of course there is the basic opaque, which is the basic white finish for just a standard look for dark garments. And the subless stop will cover as soon as we peel this Premium Plus sample that we just applied. So over here is the Premium Plus sample. You can see even though we heated and reheated, we have no heat press mark on the shirt. This has had some time to cool down and receive some of the extra heat. So let me see if I can get this thing going. Okay, yeah, it's still not adhered, so I'm going to go ahead and print it. This is when you're using the flexible application pad, it is a helpful tool, but as I mentioned, it's tough to get the heat through it. You really have to adjust your time to deliver it through the flexible application pad. I'm going to go ahead and just print without it, and I'm going to clue you into our little invention so you see the advancements we're making because of problems like this with the flex pad. We are soon to release a patented invention that actually affixes the pad to the top of the heater. That way, instead of having to wait and start with a cold pad every time to get the heat to travel through the pad, it will constantly stay warmed against the heater. And so you can get the benefits of the flexible application pad, keep it up at the peak temperature without having any of the issues that we've experienced here with the getting the heat through and removing. So once the heat travels through, it actually peels very well. And that's the Premium Plus with just the non-stick cover sheet. This product as well has extreme stretch and recovery and feels extremely soft on the garment. Almost has sort of a, some people have said a latex balloon type feel where it has that sort of stretchability and that sort of smooth feel to the surface of it as well. And Premium Plus is available in 40 different colors, and we have all types of university and sport colors as well as neon colors as well. Okay, So as far as eliminating scorch marks, we've covered some basic points that I want to review now. Number one is keep the item flat. Number two is understand that you want to maintain a low temperature adhesive. So pick a product that applies at a low temperature, something that applies for less time, and something that applies at a lower pressure. You want to reduce all of those things. You can't attribute it to one or the other. They all work in tandem with one another to leave a scorch mark. Ultimately, you want to find a fabric selection that is not prone to scorch marks or that works within the constraints. So get a supplier or two that you're going to offer their garments and test. You want to preheat the lower platen. You want to make sure you choose the right cover sheet for eliminating the heat press mark. And then you want to understand the difference between distributing pressure on a 16 by 20 platen versus a smaller raised area and adjust accordingly. So that covers some tips and tricks on heat printing performance wear, specifically with scorch marks. But there is one other glaring issue when you're heat printing performance wear that you need to be aware of, and that's called bleeding or dye migration. So I want to kind of go through this a little bit, but I'll show you one example up close here so you can see when we strip that garment down. This is an example of a basic opaque material applied to this red polyester fabric, and then you can contrast that with the one beside it and notice the difference in the white between the two different samples that are applied here that look like the same thing. Basically, that is the difference between adhesive technology for inhibiting dye migration. So if you look at this sample that's bleeding, this is what the back of that transfer looks like. You can see it's just a plain clear adhesive or a white back adhesive. And if we look at the sample for the SuperTech Sublistop that's specifically designed to inhibit bleeding, it has a charcoal-based adhesive that we call Onyx STIX2. It's basically a dye filtering adhesive, which helps to prevent the dyes from bleeding through your design. So anytime you're decorating polyester, you have the risk of dyes bleeding. When you heat those dyes up, if they're unstable in the garment, they tend to want to migrate through the print face over time. So this is particularly an issue when you're decorating any sorts of reds, maroons, even black and blue, any color that's not white basically is a dyed polyester. So when you're decorating a dyed polyester, you always want to either test it to make sure the dyes aren't unstable by sacrificing one shirt and applying something to it, or you want to just default to a Sublistop based product that's designed to inhibit that dye migration or keep it from happening. So that was a strip of the hoodie we did, and then here is an example of the full design on the hoodie out of the SuperTech Sublistop. The really big thing about this technology is that sub-block products of old used to add more of a crunchy feel or rigidity to it. This new SuperTech Sublistop maintains a soft feel, maintains stretch and recovery, so it's quite an innovation when it comes to inhibiting dye migration that happens. Now there are some other tips for inhibiting dye migration. And a lot of folks will coach you on maintaining the sort of things we talked about earlier, which is a low temperature, so you're not actually activating the dyes. But I want you to understand that even though you may not activate the dyes when you're heat printing it, you run the risk of the dyes being activated when it's in a customer's hands. So sometimes the garment will look great when it goes out your door, but then over time when it's thrown in the dryer or left in a hot car, on a summer day, the dyes will start to activate and want to ultimately bleed through the material. So that's the reason that, when you're dealing with burgundy or red polyester especially, I always recommend just go with a dye inhibiting product like the SuperTech Sublistop. If you're looking for a CAD cut material that inhibits dye migration, the answer is thermofilm. It's a little bit thicker than a basic film, than our Premium Plus, not quite as stretchy, but ultimately white stays white when you're printing with thermofilm. So this is the SuperTech Sublistop. The beautiful thing is, even though it's a charcoal-based adhesive, it still has the same functionality as the other adhesives on the tech line, meaning it only takes 2 steps of 5 and 5 seconds. So I can press it for 2 steps of 5 and 5 or 1 cycle of 10. Press it, give it a few seconds to cool down. It's a nice warm peel. And then I will cover it and apply it for an additional 5 seconds. A lot of people mistake dyed polyesters with sublimated polyester, so I'm going to show you the difference in each when you're decorating performance wear. This is a dyed polyester. The subless stop works great on dyed polyesters. Even if they're unstable dyes that want to migrate, it's going to hold true white, no problem. I can tell a dyed polyester when I look on the inside of the garment, and the inside is the same color as the outside. When you start to deal with a sublimated polyester, this is actually where the white panel itself is sublimated with ink. So this is like a motocross jersey or even some of your athletic jerseys now that have these crazy patterns on them. They are sublimated, which means it's actually a process where you're heating up sublimation ink and sublimating the fabric panel before the garment is cut and sewn together. An easy way to tell a sublimated garment versus a dyed one is if you look at the inside, you'll notice that that's white. You're not getting the green color, the bright green on the inside, it's just white. So you can tell the top surface of this fabric has been sublimated. And I mean, that dye is in there, it's not going anywhere if you scratch it, rub it, wash it, dry it, but if you put it under a heat press and start to activate those sublimation dyes, they're designed to turn into a gas up around that 350, 375 degrees. And as I mentioned before, if that gets into a car in the hot days of summer, those dyes could be activated. Or if it goes into a drying machine on high heat, those dyes can be activated. And so the point there is, while the subless stop will inhibit dye migration, it will not block dye sublimation. So if you apply this subless stop product onto the sublimated garment, eventually, if it's heated up to the right temperature, those dyes still have the ability to come through. Now I can take some safeguards in application, apply it down at 280 where I know those sublimation dyes aren't going to activate, but I'm just saying that it's high risk. Yes, you can buy a dye block product from us as well to do this, but you still run the risk of the sublimation dyes jumping over the edge of the product. So I would just try to stay away from sublimated garments altogether and deal more with just the dyed polyester, which is the majority of the marketplace anyways. And I can show you this example. Get a nice example and you can see some of the stretch and recovery of this product up close. Just a really nice finish on there. Okay. Let me just read over my bullet points, make sure I covered everything I wanted to here. Today we taught you a little, some tips on how to eliminate scorching. We taught you a bit about dye migration. Dye migration also has to do with keeping your item completely flat. So if you are applying over a seam or a raised area, obviously that's going to receive a heavy high pressure because it's raised. It has the it will strike through a little easier if you're trying to go over seams of dyed polyesters. And you always want to, you can do a low temp application and recommend some special care instructions if you want to do a non-blocking product on something that may bleed. You can always recommend that, but there's still, tremendous risk in that. Ultimately, the last tip I'll give you is you want to test your fabrics before you offer them. So if somebody walks in with that one Under Armour shirt that they want to have decorated, can you decorate it with these products? I'd say absolutely you can, but you still want to find a small inconspicuous area on that garment to ultimately lock the press down on it without a transfer, maybe on the bottom corner of it, to see how it reacts to heat. We know we have adhesives here that will apply down at 280 degrees for 5 seconds. So if you can lock that press on it for 280 degrees for 5 seconds and not leave a heat press mark, I'd say you're good to decorate that garment, accept that job. But at a bigger scale, I would recommend you just find a supplier such as Sanmar that has a performance wear line that you know the fabrics, you've tested, you know what they'll take from an application setting, and you can offer performance wear and really start to profit because it's a tremendous opportunity. The last piece that I wanted to mention about Sanmar is that they have some garments that they market as posi-charged, which basically means that they are guaranteeing the dyes not to migrate. So if you see something with that branding on it, you can read a little more on Sanmar's website, watch some promotional videos they have. It's great because it's taking the risk out of it, and you can feel free to use the products on it without a whole lot of risk of anything happening once it goes out the door. So I'd like to take a moment and launch our last poll today while Courtney gathers any additional questions that may be coming in. And I'm just curious, out of the products that we've covered today, which ones interest you? So she's working through her windows here to launch the poll. And go ahead and answer those. I believe you can select more than one, if I remember the poll correctly. I want to make sure everybody has time to answer this question, so we'll give it a couple more seconds for most of the folks voting. All right, let's go ahead and close that out. And we can share the results so you can just see what's grabbing everybody's attention here today.
61% elastic print, 63% CAD print, 58% CAD color, and 66% printing plus.
Okay. Excellent, good. So I'm glad that a lot of the listening audience seems to be interested in obviously printing these fabrics, performance fabrics. What we do now is obviously your poll response attaches to your login information that you signed up for the webinar with. So we'll certainly reach out to you, see if you're interested in purchasing any of those products or sampling any of those products to try it on performance fabrics that you may have in mind. On behalf of Stahls TV, I want to thank you for attending today. I want to encourage you to answer the survey questions that are going to pop up as soon as you log out here. I'm going to stay on for a couple more minutes while some of you are logging out and answer any remaining questions. But for those that need to get back to their day job, thanks for attending. What other questions do we have, Courtney?
One of the main questions is just using products like thermofilm or glitter flake that are getting scorch marks. How do you eliminate that with products?
Okay, yeah, so if you want to use a product where you have to have that look, like thermofilm or really glitter flake is probably more applicable than thermofilm. With thermofilm, I would say switch to Premium Plus or to a low temp material rather than trying to make thermofilm work. There's a comparable probably color for you in another product. But in the case of glitter flake material, obviously you can't achieve that effect with a basic film. So what I would recommend on that is experimenting with the different cover sheets. For instance, try the flexible application pad. Once we come out with the new attachable flexible application pad, that's going to be a great purchase for you. And then I would also just tell you to lean more towards the lighter color of performance fabrics. Usually, if they do leave a heat press mark, those are less prone to show. So try marketing, maybe a neon line with the glitter flake, or maybe white or yellow or a very light color performance fabrics with those higher temperature materials. And that'll allow you to decorate with them without having the inherent risk of decorating black or some of the fabrics that gloss up or show the box a little more prevalent.
Jody wants to know she has a job to do with red camo and she wants to print black on it. She's going to use thermofilm. Stay away from it, or recommend a different material?
Oh, so good point, Jody. Thanks for asking that question. So it sounds like you're printing on a red camo material, and I would guess that that is a actual sublimated fabric. If it's from somebody like Badger or something that's marketing a camo line, that's a sublimated panel that's done in that camo. If you look at the inside, it's white. So definitely do not use white thermofilm or a light color of product on that, because eventually it will bleed through. What I would really recommend that you do is use a dark color like black, even if the sublimation dyes do bleed through, which they will. It's not going to show on black because black is darker than the sublimation dyes. So when you do need to decorate a sublimated garment, try to pick a dark color of transfer, not a light colored one. So hopefully that answers your question.
Solutions opaque versus super tech opaque. when would you recommend using one over the other?
Okay, so good question. Solutions opaque versus Super Tech opaque. When would I recommend one versus the other? Okay, so the big difference between these two products, one is if you have a printer cutter, Solutions opaque is much more expensive than Super Tech opaque. So Super Tech opaque is a little bit thicker than Solutions opaque, but still has similar stretch and recovery. So if you're looking for a cost savings and you're doing it yourself, I would recommend Super Tech opaque unless you're extremely picky about the thickness of the material. If you're ordering it as a service from us, then right now we don't have the Super Tech opaque available as a CAD prints transfer. So Solutions opaque will work just fine. I'd recommend sticking with that one. Maybe at some point in the near future we'll launch the Tech line into our service offering.
Tammy asked, we use a sublimated poly spandex on our hats. We are looking for a product for the logo, hopefully not outlined. What would you recommend?
I'm sorry, so we use a sublimated poly spandex to like make their hats. And what was the second part of it?
I'm looking for a way to logo it without it being outlined.
Without it being, they're looking for a way to logo a sublimated poly spandex hat without it being outlined, which I assume is a reference to CAD prints and the outline that we require around designs. What I would do is something like that is pretty custom. You could get the CAD prints product from Stahls, which doesn't require the white outline, if memory serves me right. Correct me if I'm wrong, Courtney. It doesn't require the white outline with the CAD prints services offering from Stahls, just a little difference there. So you could get the sub-block product there for that use. But you're still going to run a risk of those poly dyes jumping over to the face of the print. But the good news is a hat isn't really laundered, so I doubt that it's going to be put through a dryer and up to the high heat. So sub-block is probably going to be the product choice as a CAD prints through Stahls. What other questions?
I think that's it.
Okay, that's all the questions for today. So this concludes our Stahls TV events for this week. But if you've liked what you've seen here today or throughout the week, we'd encourage you to go to the Stahls.com website. Under the events tab at the very bottom, we'll be putting a whole new schedule of live events out here shortly for the months of June and July, or you can see us live in person at the NBM show in Indianapolis here in a couple weeks. Thanks for attending.